Hey, everybody.
Hi.
Hi.
Don't mind me, I'm tormenting the little one.
Tormenting?
Okay, so she's being ferocious kitty for us tonight on our
Yes.
spooky night.
Yes, we're playing. Obviously, we are not at
We're not at hop office or
we're not at headquarters,
headquarters.
and excuse the looks like we're being lit by the headlights of a.
Oh, we got a good grip there.
Look like we're lit by the headlights of a Pinto or something like that. But hey, whatever, it doesn't matter. Good evening, everybody.
If you remember back to May when we did this up here before, and you had all that sunlight.
It's mood lighting.
Guess what? No sunlight, no more.
No. So yes, yeah, we are back up in the north reaches on the border, which we can't cross right now, even if we wanted to. Yep. Hi, Canada. We'll see you.
Miss you.
We miss you. We'll see you again someday. But
okay, you can stop gnawing on mommy. Say hi to everybody. She's on vacation. She's loving it, by the way.
yes, she is enjoying it up here.
She's not quite sure what to make of the Canadian geese, which you hear in the background.
Yes, she might hear some geese tonight, but she's loving. She was a champ on the car ride up here, and
onto the ground you go.
And she is loving being able to sit in the windows and watch the birds that are bigger than she is.
Oh yes, and getting into all sorts of kitten trouble because, well, we're working on kitten-proofing the cottage.
Yes, one thing at a time, though.
Cheers.
Yeah, cheers.
It's story time.
It is story time, and we got stories to go with the theme tonight of where we are. We are going to be sharing stories of the Great Lakes.
Yes, and we have stories from both sides, so both Canadian and American stories tonight.
And there might be plenty of ship stories. We know we've done a couple ship episodes before, and we have a thing for the water.
We do.
We like the water.
We like the river, which is why we live on one down in Richmond and why we vacation to one up here.
Yes.
So,
always need to have water nearby. I don't know how they do it out in the Great Plains.
It's not fun.
I'll take your word for it.
Been there, done that, hated Tornado Alley. We're done there.
Yeah.
Cheers to all my friends who are still out there.
Yeah. And hopefully we had our mishap for the evening is already out of the way.
Yeah, we had a beer faux pas. The bottom of the stein just fell right off.
Yeah,
literally beer everywhere.
Yeah, good, beautiful old beer glass, and the bottom of the glass just sheared right off. It was a tragedy.
I'll be cleaning the carpet.
So
anyway,
cheers, and hope everybody's doing okay. Yeah, everybody is getting to be the end of summer.
Yep. Schools are starting back. Be safe for everybody who is going back in person. Friends, family, all of that.
Yeah. So one last summer hurrah. I know a couple of weeks ago we did the haunted Outer Banks. Mm-hmm. We did the haunted Outer Banks. We've had a bunch of friends that were down there when we were telling those stories, and friends that have gone down there since.
Yep.
And now we're up on we're on the river.
We're on the river,
close to the Great Lakes. So
we can see it way down that way.
The lake's down there.
Somewhere.
Not that you can see anything at this hour.
You have to have a really clear day and some binoculars.
Mom can hear the honkers. Yes, they're noisy out there tonight.
Yes, they are.
So we will try to outproject them. But anyways, yeah.
But yeah, so I had a lot of fun doing the research on this. Actually, it's Chris's mom who got us interested in the stories of the Great Lakes because she has a ton of books on the ghost ships and the ghost stories. So we raided her library.
Yes, and I just finished one tonight.
Yep.
Today, which since I finished it so recently,
it's stuck in his head, and we're going to actually include some of those stories on another tale or another night because there's a lot of lighthouse stories in there, and found a lot of lighthouses stories when I was doing the research. So we'll do a Great Lakes lighthouse.
Yeah.
But definitely,
this is a great book. Not that you can really read it too well because Facebook does everything backwards, but it's Great Lakes Ghost Stories by Wes Olazowski. Mm-hmm. So,
and he's one of the premier writers up here for that, and
he's actually a historian by trade. The whole ghost story thing is just kind of something you kind of slip into sometimes when you're researching. For
and when you're researching the ghost ships, the ghost stories tend to follow. So, and a ghost ship is a ship that's been lost, and they haven't found it. So there's a lot of ships that have been swallowed up by the Great Lakes, and they are called ghost ships because they have not been found. The lakes are quite deep.
Yeah, they can get a lot deeper than you might think.
So there's a lot of wrecks that have been found. You can look up maps of the wrecks of the Great Lakes, and you can see where all the wrecks are. It's known as the graveyard of the Great Lakes, and it's, there's plenty out there that have never been found, and so we're actually going to talk about some of them that have never been found, but their ghostly apparitions do appear on the water.
So, and Yuna's playing behind us. So
she's tearing her box apart. We had to order from Chewy. She has spooky toys now.
Yep.
She has zombies in her cat kennel.
Of course she does.
Because
that's how it goes. But yeah, so we got a whole bunch of ghost stories tonight, and then
we have a legend in here as well.
Well, a legend, a ship that's difficult to just not talk about.
Yeah, when you're talking about the ghost ships of the Great Lakes, you kind of have to talk about this one.
Yeah, even though it's not a ghost story per se,
and it has been found.
It has been found. It's a very interesting tale. So we'll have the story of a very interesting, much more modern shipwreck this evening too. But that'll be one of the last ones we get to. First,
let's just talk about the Great Lakes.
Yes. So, for centuries, North America's 5 Great Lakes have served as the setting for a host of legends, folk tales, and nautical mysteries. The local Ojibwa, excuse me, sorry, no offense intended, First Nation, for example, tell stories of fabulous monsters which inhabit the depths, shores, and skies of these inland seas. From Meshipishu, a huge horned aquatic creature imbued with mystical powers, to the Thunderbird, the enemy of the Mojapishu, responsible for the creation of lightning storms, to... Did you have to put that in there?
Yes.
I should have edited that out.
Anyway, the long-haired sirens.
Yes, so there's all kinds of monsters that inhabit these kind of freshwater oceans, if you will. I mean, they're huge bodies of water. You can't see the other side at most points.
Now, one of these days, we really just need to find somebody who is a folklorist up here and just have them on the show.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Because then they can pronounce all these names and we don't butcher them.
Yeah. So, anyway, French-Canadian voyagers who paddled their birch bark canoes across these waters during the days of the North American fur trade had their own tales of haunted spots and curious locales, like the pictured rocks on the shore of Lake Superior, a series of colorful sandstone bluffs pitted with dark caverns which were said to be home to a mischievous spirit. And then there's La Cloche, a strange rock on an island in Lake Huron, which, when struck, rang like a bell across the water. More modern Michigan lore is replete with stories of bottomless and subterranean outlets which connect these massive bodies of water with smaller adjacent lakes and waterways. Legend has that underwater currents draw the corpses of drowned fishermen into these outlets, engendered another popular folktale which contends that the Great Lakes never gave up their dead. Mariners say Lake Superior is icy and cold, and it's called the graveyard of the Great Lakes, with harrowing tales of shipwrecks, spooky lighthouses, and ghost ships.
So just with the nickname, the graveyard of the Great Lakes, and the fact that it is not giving up its dead just tells you why we have so many spirits among these 5 bodies of water.
Yep.
And connected up to the St. Lawrence Seaway, which is what's right behind us.
Yep.
Now, the lake's lonely, picturesque lighthouses also produce a wide variety of ghosts. Witnesses at the Marquette Harbor Lighthouse have described a ghostly figure of a girl seen staring out of the upper floor window, peering out at the horizon towards the big lake. At the Big Bay Point Lighthouse B&B, to this day, guests are awakened by the ghost of an elderly groundskeeper with a Coast Guard attire standing at the foot of their bed in the middle of the night. He is mourning the loss of his son, and then he vanishes back into the walls. Very creepy.
Oh, yes.
Meanwhile, at the Split Rock Lighthouse, local legend says that a visitor in the mid-1980s saw a man in a lightkeeper's uniform on the catwalk long after the museum had closed for the evening. When he returned the next day, he was told that no one had been at the tower after hours.
The sight of ghost ships has circulated throughout the Great Lakes history. One recent account happened in October of 2016 when Jason Aslan and a friend were taking in the full foliage in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. I am I'm stuttering all over the place tonight. Sorry. When they stopped to photograph a gorgeous rainbow over the lake, things got spooky. The rainbow, and noticed the object. I zoomed in and still couldn't understand what I was seeing. I've been there before and never saw it before. It really just didn't belong there. I've seen ships before and it looked nothing like that. They watched it for a while before it just disappeared.
Now, this was actually given as part of an interview on CBS at the local station. So it's kind of cool that we found an interview with that.
So people are seeing mysterious things out on the water all the time. And it's kind of up to you to determine, do you think it's actually, is it a ghost ship? Or maybe is it just some fog on the water, with the trick of the eyes or something like that?
Reflection.
But there's all kinds of stories going back centuries about activity and various sightings like this.
So one of the oldest ghost stories I found is that of Le Griffon, or the Griffon.
It pretty much kind of the original one for the Great Lakes. It was the first proper ship built to traverse the Great Lakes.
Yeah. So wooden ship at this point in time, and as we said, over the past 4 centuries, over 6,000 ships have come to rest beneath the waves of these 5 Great Lakes. And that is also not including any of the natives' boats that they would have had their birch bark. You're not the only one.
Yeah.
Canoes.
We have not been drinking before this. Maybe
not.
that's a problem.
We didn't take a shot.
No, we don't have any liquor with us.
No, we don't, and we didn't visit the distillery.
No,
anyway,
anyways,
moving on. So the French bateaus also that would have been on here. This didn't include any of those. So this was, as I said, the first ship that was built to go across these, and it was meant to be part of the fur trade.
Yes.
That was going on. So this starts with René Robert Cavalier, Sieur de la Salle.
Sieur de la Salle.
Yep. He was an ambitious French adventurer. He is actually remembered today because he helped establish a vast bygone province known as French Louisiana. La Salle trained in France to be a Jesuit priest, but he left that order in 1667 to pursue fame and fortune in Canada, which at that point in time was a French colony known as New France.
So we're going back a long way.
Way back.
Way back.
After acquiring some land on the island of Montreal, he actually led an unsuccessful expedition in the search of the Northwest Passage, which was the legendary waterway crossing North America to connect the Atlantic with the Pacific. In 1672, he allied himself with the governor of New France, the Count de Frontenac, and he hoped to expand the colony westward from the confines in the valley of the St. Lawrence River and bring the fur trade to the Great Lakes. It was a wild region at this point in time that was populated with the warring Indian tribes and a handful of Jesuit missionaries and, of course, the fur traders. In 1673, LaSalle helped the governor establish Fort Frontenac at the junction of the St. Lawrence River and Lake Ontario, the colony's first real incursion into the Great Lakes.
So LaSalle helped expand and consolidate fur trade holdings in the Lake Ontario region over subsequent years, but to further expand the venture, the construction of Le Griffon started in 1679 above Niagara Falls. That means down by Lake Erie, actually. It was an unpleasant task for LaSalle's men, who began the project by needing to haul all these materials up a portage trail adjacent to the Niagara River. So they were hauling stuff from down below Niagara Falls, up around Niagara Falls, to the top and down by Lake Ontario.
And if you've ever been out there, that is not a fun portage.
Yeah. And this is, of course, back in the days when there were no roads or anything like that.
So you're basically following like a goat trail.
Yeah. So it was a pretty bad, we're talking decking spikes, rigging, all the equipment necessary to build a proper ship. Of course, they could have harvested the lumber once they were up there. But anyway, still.
They didn't.
Lots of stuff. So, throughout the winter, spring, and early summer, they labored through various difficulties from frozen fingers to empty stomachs, all the while wary of the sullen Iroquois braves who often loitered around the worksite, fingering their tomahawks and war clubs. They only just had kind of the very inkling of an understanding with the Iroquois, even though they had official permission from the Iroquois chief. Not everybody agreed with the chief's decision to let the Frenchmen come in and do this.
And they didn't trust him at all, so there were always braves watching.
Yes. So despite the difficulties, this 45-ton ship was christened Le Griffon, and that mythical creature being the primary ornament on Count Frontenac's coat of arms. Its prow bore a wooden carving of the legendary half-lion, half-eagle, for which it was named, and its decks bristled with 7 small cannons, which were fired at its christening. La Salle, eager to make use of the new ship, he and all of his men embarked on Le Griffon and set out on her maiden voyage across Lake Erie. For 3 days, the explorers sailed down the length of the lake, and on the 4th day they turned north and sailed up the Detroit River, and they crossed Lake St. Clair beyond, and proceeded up the St. Clair River into Lake Huron.
It's a little zigzag.
Yep. So from there, the explorers were beset by a ferocious gale which threatened to capsize the vessel. Praying to St. Anthony of Padua, the patron saint of mariners, the sailors managed to make their way up Lake Huron to the island of Mackinac.
Yep.
Home to Indian villages and a Jesuit mission and a haven for fur traders. So
a safe space.
A safe space. They certainly were some early explorers, but they weren't really the first. They were the first ones to have a proper large ship, but Jesuit missionaries had come into the area long before that, and there were some fur traders that were truly out on the frontier.
Glenn had a quick question. Were there many drownings in the Great Lakes?
There have been thousands and thousands.
And we'll get to some of that.
Yes, we will. It's the Great Lakes have thousands of shipwrecks. Thousands of shipwrecks.
You mentioned 6,000, and not all the crew members survived. So if you went down in the middle of the lake, you most likely drowned.
Yeah.
And the lakes are cold. Like, we're talking icy cold. So you're not going to survive long in them if you're in the water.
Even the hottest of summers up here, if you get up into like the stretch with the 90 degrees, it might make it tolerable for you to get in and go for a pleasant swim in like August. Yeah. But once the season gets cold,
it's a quick death.
Yeah, and over the winter, the lakes, they've plenty of ice out there.
Yeah.
So yeah, the lakes stay very cold through the seasons. So, anyways, in early September, La Salle and the crew of Le Griffon sailed west into Lake Michigan and further southwest into Green Bay. There, on an island, he found members of an advance party that he had sent out earlier in the summer, and discovered to his pleasure that they had acquired a small fortune in furs from their trade with the natives. La Salle then had these furs loaded into the cargo hold of Le Griffon and ordered 6 of his men to transport them to Fort Conty, where the Niagara River flowed into Lake Ontario. The ship's pilot was to return to Lake Michigan as soon as the cargo was unloaded. Le Griffon departed on September 18, 1679, just as a storm began to brew. Aside from the vessel's own crew, La Salle and his explorers were the last men to set eyes on Le Griffon. The vessel disappeared on her voyage somewhere in the waters of Lake Michigan, Huron, or Erie, and most assumed that the ship had floundered in the storm and was lost with all hands. This theory is supported by the discoveries of Albert Cullis, who named the Mississauga Strait Lighthouse on Mantuan Island in Mand, the lighthouse, in the 19th century. In the late 1890s, Cullis reportedly discovered a watch chain, 3 17th century coins, and 5 human skeletons in and around a cave on the island. One of the skeletons was that of a large man, and the captain of Le Griffon was Luke the Dane, a very large man. Another theory regarding the fate of Le Griffon contends that the ship was boarded by hostile natives who murdered her crew before setting her ablaze. La Salle and his crew certainly had their fair share of rivals who would stop at nothing to protect their own interests in the fur trade. La Salle himself suspected that the ship's occupants had intentionally scuttled Le Griffon and made off with the furs she contained. In letters to Count Frontenac, the explorer wrote about an Indian rumor which held that in 1680, white men matching the description of the crew of Le Griffon had been captured by Indians on the Mississippi River, paddling canoes filled with valuable goods. The natives killed every crew member but the captain, whom they took prisoner. La Salle believed that these unfortunates constituted his ship's crew, who had intentionally sank his vessel and made off with the furs with the intention of joining a famous fur trader named Daniel Greysalon. sur de l'Ouet. Whatever the case, Le Griffon's undiscovered wreck is considered today to be the holy grail of Great Lakes shipwreck hunters.
Now you would think a wooden ship from 1660s, late 1660s, oh, it must have just deteriorated by now. Not true. Because of the depth of the lakes and how cold they actually are really good preservers. So anything that goes down in them often is still intact today.
If it gets deep enough, cold enough, lacking enough oxygen.
Yeah, and lacking, if it's, as we said, deep enough, there's going to be a lack of animal life that's going to chew on it.
Yep.
So it's possible that that ship could still be preserved down in the water today, which is why it's the Holy Grail. Now, the ghost of Le Griffon is said to haunt the northern waters of Lake Michigan since its disappearance. For centuries, the sailors of Lake Michigan have claimed to see ghostly outlines of an ancient sailing ship suddenly emerge out of the fog, destined to collide with their own vessel, and just before contact, the ship disappears. Others have claimed to see the same ship sailing out of Green Bay on foggy nights. Unsurprisingly, the sightings of the ill-fated Le Griffon are considered to be bad omens.
Yep.
You don't want to see that
You don't want to see that ghost ship because nobody knows what happened to it. Bad news.
Yeah, and it said that if you see that ship before your own voyage, your voyage is destined to be bad. Yes. Possibly the same fate.
Now, with that, we'll move on to another ill-fated ship, but with a slightly less menacing spirit associated with it.
Yes, so we're going to jump over to Lake Superior for this one.
And there is the ghost, well, we'll get to him.
Yeah.
We'll talk about the SS Kamloops.
Yeah.
So, another of the thousands of ships that have been devoured by the Great Lakes over the past 4 centuries is the SS Kamloops, a steam-powered freighter which sank with all hands off Isle Royale in Lake Superior just south of Thunder Bay, Ontario, in 1927. What distinguishes the Kamloops from other Great Lakes shipwrecks are the crew members, both corporal and ethereal, who are said to still wander its decks at the bottom of the lake. The SS Kamloops began her life in 1924 in a shipyard in northeast England. Commissioned by the Montreal-based shipping company Canada Steamship Lines.
Which still operates today.
Yep, you'll still see Canada Steamship Lines all over the place. She had a length of 250 feet and a gross tonnage of 2,402, making her one of the smaller freighters on the Great Lakes at that time. Her limited size, though, allowed her to traverse the Welland Canal, which is an artificial waterway connecting Lake Ontario with Lake Erie. After steaming across the Atlantic Ocean and up the St. Lawrence River to her home on the Great Lakes, the Kamloops was put to work hauling manufactured goods, many of them destined for the rapidly developing prairie provinces, from the St. Lawrence to Lake Superior. Due to the hazardous Great Lakes freighting practice of shipping as late as possible prior to the winter freeze-up, the steamer and her crew had a few close calls. In 1926, for example, the freighter became trapped in ice in the St. Mary's River, the waterway that connects Lake Huron with Lake Superior. In late November 1927, the Kamloops was under the command of Captain William Bryan, who was tasked with hauling a mixed cargo from Montreal to Fort William, Ontario, a district of what is now Thunder Bay. On this journey, it trailed in the wake of the Quebec, right?
Yep.
Quebec, an empty grain carrier also bound for Fort William. The Kamloops passed through the Sioux Locks, a water lift on the St. Mary's River, on December 4th, when it was beset by a howling northern gale.
Now, on the night of December 6th, the waters off Isle Royale, the captain of the Quebec spied a dark, misshapen mass looming before him through the fog. He and his crew frantically maneuvered their vessel to avoid the mysterious obstacle and narrowly avoided what promised to be a catastrophic collision. They sounded their foghorn to warn Captain Bryan and the crew of the Kamloops and continued on to Fort William. Disturbingly, the Kamloops failed to make port that night. Search parties were sent out into the Great Lakes, all of them turning up no evidence of the ship, and after the 26th, 3 weeks after the ship's disappearance, the winter weather came down hard, and as did the hopes for the Kamloops crew. Excuse me. The search was halted, and the official record is that all of the ship's crew was lost. So never to be found again. Yet. No one is quite sure what caused the Kamloops to sink. A few clues were that discovered paint a pretty horrific picture. It wasn't until the spring that the first signs of the Kamloops' demise were discovered by fishermen off the Isle Royale. Scattered across the island were the remains of 9 crew members who managed to escape on a lifeboat. Some were found huddled near a makeshift fire pit, others washed up on shore, and the ones that weren't frozen to death appeared to have been partially eaten by the island's wolf population. The Kamloops, on the other hand, was nowhere to be found. It went down in history as one of the ghost ships of the Great Lakes, dozens of ships that again have mysteriously vanished without a trace. Now, it retained this status for 50 years until it was discovered at the bottom of Lake Superior in a near-perfect condition, including the rolls of Lifesaver candy. Literally, there are photographs of crates of Lifesaver candy, and they are perfectly preserved. You could probably eat them. I wouldn't recommend it, but you probably could eat them. And actually, fun little note, Lifesaver candy was actually started in Gouverneur,
which is just
not too far from here.
Not too far from here, just a little bit inland from here.
Yep.
Along good old Route 11. Yep.
St. Lawrence University alum. Anyway, moving on. Back to the story. Now, I just lost my place.
Lifesaver candy.
Right in here.
Lifesaver candy.
Ah, thank you. Since the Lake Superior was the only
above freezing at its depths, the icy water acted as a kind of natural refrigerator. Coupled with a relative lack of life at the bottom of the lake, even things like clothing and leather shoes, still stored neatly in crew cabins, were perfectly preserved, lending a dreamlike eeriness to the exploration of the sunken ship. Considering the depth and temperature of the waters, the dive was reserved only for the most experienced, which meant that relatively few explorers got to wander through the sunken bowels of the Kamloops. The ones who did, though, began to resurface with frightening tales. It would seem that at least one of the ship's crew decided to stick around, and so many divers had met him that they even gave him a nickname, Grandpa. As exploration of the Kamloops grew, whispers of Grandpa began to make the rounds in diving circles. Some divers reported seeing the pale white ghost kicked back in one of the crew's bunks, quietly and calmly watching the explorers make their way through the sunken ship. Others claimed he would wander the boat, oblivious to the fact that it was sitting at the bottom of Lake Superior, going about his business as if he were still alive. Then there were others who reported something even more frightening, that Grandpa would follow them as they made their way through the ship, and that he wasn't just a ghost, he was actually physically there. Grandpa, they claimed, would actually reach out and try to touch them. It turns out that the frigid waters of Lake Superior had not just refrigerated farm equipment and foodstuffs, it had perfectly preserved one of the 13 crewmen who never made it ashore. His body stiff and his skin white as snow, the nameless member of the Kamloops crew had floated inside the ship for 50 years, alone until the divers began to occasionally filter in. Some had taken to calling him Old Whitey, but those who'd heard the stories of ghostly encounters knew the truth. This was Grandpa's body.
Explorers began to take notice of how Grandpa's corpse would follow them from the time they entered the ship until they left. Some of them rationalized it as the currents of the lake, but others insisted that it's something unnatural, intelligent, and very, very specific about the way the Grandpa moves. Some even would say that they saw Grandpa's ghost and his body on the same trip, but never in the same room. Despite how frightening a visit from Grandpa is, there's never any reason for alarm. He has never tried to hurt or drown anyone. He's never appeared angry or upset. Mostly he seems happy just to have some company. After all, it's been quite a while. Even as a corpse, though initially disturbing, floating peacefully along next to the divers and revealing the small details, including a wedding ring that is still on his finger. Grandpa's just lonely. Now today, the corpse is still down there. This is actually a preserved dive, so as we said, you have to have permission to dive it, and you have to be extremely experienced to go down and dive it, which means that's why it is so perfectly pristine and preserved down there. Some people are wondering why Grandpa's still down there, or Old Whitey as he's known. Many believe that it might just be because there's something about the sinking, and Grandpa is just waiting for somebody to actually discover why maybe the ship sank, and once that happens, then maybe he would be able to rest. Although if his body's still down there and hasn't been brought up for burial, I'd say that's another reason why.
Yep. I think that they're just going to let him rust it down there at this point, which is probably for the best.
Yeah, and if you go looking for photos, I actually only found 2 photos of his body, and you can basically only see from the waist onward because of where it's positioned. But there are photographs out there on the internet of this.
Yep. You can go and check out Grandpa for yourself if you look up the Kamloops. That's Kamloops.
Yeah.
So, still down there. Now, Patrick, it is kind of ironic with the Lifesaver candy, but now, does anybody know, and if you know why Lifesavers are named Lifesavers? So everybody knows Lifesavers, at least when they were originally made, they all had the hole in the middle of them. Well, the idea is that this was supposed to be a choke-proof candy. If you went ahead and you accidentally swallowed the Lifesaver hole and it got stuck in your throat, that little hole in the Lifesaver candy would still allow some air to move through it so that ideally you would not choke to death on it.
Yep.
Hence the Lifesaver name.
And yes, they did mold it after a boat Lifesaver.
Yes. So it's got both those things going for it. It was a play on words and good stuff like that.
Yeah. And when you drive into Governor, you actually, as you're driving into it, you've just crossed over the bridge, there is a huge Lifesaver roll of candy saying, "Welcome to Governor."
Yep.
So
that's what they're known for.
Yep.
Cute little town.
It is. It's a pretty little town.
Unless you have to drive through it. It's a pain to drive through. Anyways,
a lot of stop signs.
A lot of stop signs, stoplights, extended.
But cute town.
Yeah, cute town.
Drawbridge, train tracks. This is all on the main drag.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. So,
all right, so
anyways.
let's jump to one of the islands in the middle of Lake Huron. This is Mackinac Island, which is very much a tourist place today, but it is a tourist destination that is frozen in time.
Yes. So, if you've probably heard the name Mackinac Island before, and it's one of the places where they don't allow modern automobiles.
Nope. So you have to bike or walk everywhere.
And the way the zoning and the codes are up there is that everything has to be maintained in the traditional kind of Victorian style.
Yeah.
So going to Mackinac,
it has to be preserved.
Yeah, it's like a step back in time, and that's definitely reflected in some of the stories that we have tonight.
So this is one of the places that is known to have more ghosts than human inhabitants on the island.
It has a good long history to it.
It does. Now, they'll say that, of course, that any hauntings can usually be traced back to something occurring in the area. Sometimes it's murder, sometimes it's suicide, sometimes it's battle. Sometimes it's the makeup of the land itself, the geology of the land, or the fact that this is surrounded by water. In this case, Mackinac Island, the history goes about 700 years before European settlers arrived. Archaeological digs placed the ancient Native American settlements as far back as 900 AD. So this place has been inhabited for quite a while. It served as a prime fishing location, but the Anishinaabe tribes considered it a sacred place, believing that it was the home to the Great Spirit. And their traditional stories, they actually say that the island was created by the Great Hare, and they would trek to the island to make sacrifices, but it was also a designated sacred burial places for tribal chiefs. There are a lot of bodies on this island. Despite the importance to the tribes, Mackinac was mysteriously deserted by the time the Europeans discovered it in the mid-1600s. It was settled by the French. The British took control of the island after that in 1780, establishing Fort Mackinac, and somehow the fort managed to escape any battles in the American Revolution, but it was soon handed back over to the United States in the Treaty of Paris, 1783. That didn't last long. It was quickly captured by the British during the War of 1812, and it stayed that way despite many attacks trying to recapture it back on the American side. We don't get it back until the end of 1815, thanks to the Treaty of Ghent, and we have had it ever since then. Now, after the Civil War, it becomes the popular tourist destination, thanks to the natural beauty, and 3 years after Yellowstone is designated as the country's first national park, Mackinac Island becomes the second. So it is part of the park system as well.
Goes back a long ways too. One of the first.
Now, after that, of course, hotels and restaurants start to pop up in rapid succession, and that accommodates the vacationers coming from cities like Detroit, and the rest is history. As we mentioned, it is now preserved because of the ordinances required by the landowners to maintain that traditional Victorian look. Now, the ghosts of Mackinac Island, considering that it was a giant native burial ground, then it had a fort on it and battles on it. There's a whole bunch of dead bodies there, and then you turn it into a tourist destination because that's what we do in history. Okay.
It's totally
It's an 80s horror film waiting to happen.
Maybe just a touch cliche, but it's true. True story. Yeah. Tourist town built on a Native American burial ground that was in turn battleground multiple times. Yeah. You're just asking for trouble.
Film. Here we go.
So,
September's tomorrow.
Yes. So, first we will start with the Grand Hotel. Built in the late 19th century, the Grand Hotel is known for two things: being the setting for the 1980 film Somewhere in Time starring Christopher Reeve, and for being haunted as all get out. Legends say that when the construction crew was digging the hotel's foundation, they began to find so many human skeletons that they lost track of them all. To this day, rumors persist that the workers, increasingly unsure of how to handle the situation, simply gave up on collecting the bones and started building the hotel anyways. The results are as you might predict. One of the spookiest tales to come from the old hotel deals with an evil entity in the form of a black mass. As two maintenance men performed a check of the hotel's theater stage, some of them was struck with the overwhelming feeling that something was watching them. Something that he could only describe as evil. As he looked out over the stage, he noticed two glowing red eyes peering from a dark shadow hovering above the theater floor. As he watched in horror, the black form rushed towards him, knocking him off his feet. 2 days later, the man woke up in a hospital and swore never to return to the Grand.
I don't blame him. If you get knocked out cold for 2 days after a black mass rushes you,
with glowing red eyes.
Yeah, I wouldn't be going back either.
Yeah. And the stories don't stop there. Some staff have reported seeing a man in a top hat frequenting the second floor bar's piano, only to disappear moments later, leaving only the lingering scent of a cigar behind. Others have reported a woman in Victorian clothing that tends to roam the hotel's employee housing, sometimes even curling up next to the workers as they bed down for the night. Ghosts need naps too.
Fort Mackinac. Again, as we mentioned, this was built back by the Revolutionary times. So it goes without saying that locations that are known for their part in battles are magnets for restless spirits. Gettysburg. Any of the battlefields out there. Rarely there are as many reports as the ones that are captured at this fort. The apparitions of soldiers glimpsed walking in the rifle range, trail, piles of phantom limbs spotted in the hospital, furniture that moves on its own, trippy motion detectors in the Officer Hill apartment quarters. The fort has no shortage of paranormal activity, and that's just some of it. Not all the deaths that occurred at Fort Mackinac were those of soldiers either. At least 13 children died here. They were victims of typhoid fever, tuberculosis, and other diseases. Those who have heard the cries of the children echo through the halls believe that some of their spirits still reside among the private quarters where they once lived. Those who wake early enough to watch the sunrise can often hear the sound of a phantom fife player echoing through the fogs near the fort's North Sally Port entrance.
So, plenty of stuff going on there. Now, Glenn did have a question. Are there any haunted lighthouses on the Great Lakes?
There are a lot of them, and
Yes.
That's going to be an entirely different show.
Yep, so we will have some of those stories, maybe just not tonight.
Yes.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of them.
There's
and
a lot.
We know you love haunted lighthouses. We
Yes.
do too.
And I was very excited. Glenn did share with me in the last week that the Point Lookout Lighthouse is actually just about ready to officially reopen on a more permanent basis. So
Road trip. All right, so the drowning pool. This is located between Mission Point Resort and Mackinac's downtown area. It's a 20-foot drop-off which has been nicknamed the Drowning Pool. According to the local lore, it receives its name not only from the occasional accidental drowning, but also because of the purposeful torture of women who were accused of witchcraft on this island. Back when Fort Mackinac was in its heyday, the 1700s and early 1800s, numerous brothels dotted the community, and whether they were a source of moral outrage, the target of jealousy, 7 ladies of the night were accused of being witches and for enticing unsuspecting soldiers, fur traders, and husbands to their houses. Traditional witchcraft trial fashion, rocks are tied around their ankles and they are thrown into the lagoon. If they fail to drown, then they are witches and are subsequently hung or burned at the stake. Of course, these poor women never surfaced, and they were found innocent of witchcraft. The community's response, oops, our bad.
Yeah. So it's believed that these unjustly accused still haunt the Drowning Pool. There have been reports of shadows on the water that produce no ripples, and likewise there have been huge splashes with no discernible source. So, if you get the chance to go to Mackinac and you feel like doing a little...
This is probably one place I would not go, just because anytime I get near some place that's had witch trials, I don't feel too good.
No.
So, Salem and I love Salem, but when I get anywhere near the judge's house or the graveyard or the hanging area, I get sick, just physically ill. So
yeah.
No.
Even though in this case there truly was not any witchcraft going on.
Neither was there in Salem,
True.
just jealous neighbors.
True, there's that. Unless you watch the TV shows.
Yeah, which I watched one episode and that was enough.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is a sore spot for me.
I'll watch that on my own sometime.
Anyway.
I'll get to it. Anyways,
Mission Point,
the
resort that I just mentioned.
now this is kind of an oddball location on Mackinac Island. It's a more modern location, and it's definitely a very odd spot. So, if you're looking for an off-the-grid location, Mackinac Island is definitely a prime spot for people to go and do things that they would prefer to be unnoticed, and this includes a cult that was known as the Moral Realignment. They aimed to mold the world's morals to their own liking. Take that for what you will.
I'm not gonna go there.
So the cult built a large conference center in the 1950s, but they were unable to hold on to the property. They fizzled out in typical cultish fashion. The property
Without
changed.
violence.
Yeah, the property changed hands a few times until the late 1980s, when it officially became known as the Mission Point Resort, and the resort may be the most haunted locale on all of Mackinac today.
So, if you really want the haunted place to go and stay, this would be the one you go to.
Yes. So, the resort's most popular ghost is Harvey. Now, this is a student that died in the late 1960s, and as the official story goes, Harvey was the victim of a broken heart. He made his way to the bluffs behind the resort, which was at that point being leased to Mackinac College, and, pulled a gun and shot himself. His body wasn't discovered for 6 months.
However, this was a little...
Fishy.
Very fishy.
Very fishy.
A lot of people suspect foul play, which could explain why he never left the island. When his body was discovered, it was found with 2 gunshot wounds in it.
It's the head. 2 gunshot wounds to the head.
That screams execution.
And then the gun was nowhere nearby.
Yeah.
It was found, but it was nowhere near him.
So probably not suicide. But again, that's what it was labeled at the time.
Yeah.
Somebody got paid off. Moving
on.
So Harvey is reported to be lingering in the Mission Point Theater, which is he is known to actually pinch and poke young women when the lights go out. Numerous other spirits are said to inhabit this resort, from the spirit of a young girl heard calling to her parents, Native American spirits wandering the property, and a woman singing old-time music near the theater. This resort is so haunted that it actually drew ghost hunters to it in 2010. When they were part of Sci-Fi. They were there in the middle of February. Amy Bruni believes Mackinac's hauntings might have a lot to do with how little the island has actually changed over the years. She says it's legitimately a step back in time. They don't allow the motor vehicles. It's quiet. You can feel like you're from another era. They put a huge focus on the restoration and the preservation so the ghosts may feel comfortable to stay. It puts you in the mindset that you can really contact more with any of the spirits that may be lingering, and you look at the island exactly as they did. Now, she did report that they were about to experience a huge snowstorm when they were filming this. It was 15 degrees below, which I never would have wanted to be out there investigating in that weather. But they actually had an amazing time, and they were able to capture the sounds of laughter. They saw shadow figures. They heard footsteps, which they also captured on their EVPs. And one of them was actually pinched off camera. She's been back since then. And they actually host ghost conferences there, or conventions there, periodically as well. So that invites people to come out and do investigations and meet various ghost paranormal teams and that sort of thing. She and Adam have been back there a couple of times for those conferences. So that's something, if you're interested in doing a conference, check out what Mission Point has available. Usually they're in the fall, I think is what I was seeing.
That's what most people think of as spooky season.
Yeah.
And
we probably would never be able to go because it's spooky
season.
season and we're busy. But I would love to go
it'd
there
be beautiful.
just to visit.
Oh, God, it must be absolutely gorgeous.
Mm-hmm. Road trip.
Well, no, not a road trip because you can't drive to Mackinac.
Well, you have to take the ferry over.
Yeah, you can.
Boat trip. Drive to there and then take the ferry over. Anyway.
Details. Yeah. We'll plan that out another day. Another day.
All right, so now we're going to get to our legend for the night, and
yes.
that is the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald.
Yes. Now, as we mentioned, there is not a ghost story associated with the Edmund Fitzgerald, but it is certainly the shipwreck that has a shipwreck of the modern era that has captured the fascination of so many people because it was such a sudden and unexpected occurrence. So the Edmund Fitzgerald, massive freighter, and it stands out amongst the local legends, and it's really kind of
it's been immortalized in a song called "The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald" that came out in 1976. So that's why it has persevered and become more famous than some of our other wrecks.
Yeah. But the Edmund Fitzgerald was originally built back in 1957. And that was when an American insurance company called Northwestern Mutual...
Sound familiar?
Yep, still around today. Commissioned the ship's construction and named it after its president. With a length of 729 feet and a gross registered tonnage of 13,632... good-sized boat. It was, at the time of its launch, the largest vessel ever to ply the waters of the Great Lakes. The Edmund Fitzgerald began its career on an ominous note, however. During its christening in Detroit, Michigan, Elizabeth Fitzgerald, the wife of the businessman after whom the freighter was named, tried 3 times to smash a champagne bottle over the ship's bow, succeeding finally on the last.
That's not good.
No, it's not good. You're supposed to break it on the first try.
It's bad luck if you don't break it on the first try.
Yeah. So, and then it gets worse. When the ropes securing the ship to the shore were subsequently severed, the freighter slid down a ramp into the Detroit River and hit the water at an awkward angle, sending up an enormous wave that doused all who attended the ceremony. As we mentioned, water's a touch cold around here. The shock of the cold water sent one of the onlookers into cardiac arrest, and the 58-year-old attendee who had traveled from Toledo, Ohio to witness the launch died on the scene.
3 strikes, you're out right now.
Yeah. Not off to a great start.
No.
But, now, with that said, despite its inauspicious inauguration, the Edmund Fitzgerald went on to enjoy a brief but prosperous career hauling taconite, which are their processed tiny little iron ore pellets, across the Great Lakes. Due to its speed and cargo capacity, the freighter routinely set hauling records during the 748 trips it completed through its lifetime.
Short lifetime, 748 trips. Imagine what they do if it's a long lifetime.
Yeah. well-traveled boat. Now, on the afternoon of November 9th, 1975, the Edmund Fitzgerald left Superior, Wisconsin for a steel mill near Detroit, its cargo hold filled with 26,000 tons of taconite. She was captained by Ernest McSorley, a heavy-weather Canadian-born mariner known for his quiet stoicism and his willingness to sail through the roughest of waters, and it was crewed by 28 veteran sailors. About 3 hours into her voyage, she overtook and was subsequently trailed by another taconite-laden cargo ship called the Arthur M. Anderson, whose captain, Jesse Birney Cooper, agreed to accompany the Edmund Fitzgerald across Lake Superior.
And you often will see two ships, one right after another, and that's a safety thing that they do.
Yeah, caravanning, essentially. Yeah. So, at that time, a severe winter storm was making its way across the lake, fueled by the collision of cold Arctic winds with warm fronts from the Gulf of Mexico. These ferocious cyclonic gales are often referred to as the Witch of November.
So if you hear stories about the witch coming across the lakes, that's what they're referring to.
Yeah. So, trusting in the experience of their crews, though, and the integrity of the vessels which they commanded, neither McSorley nor Cooper thought twice about steering their freighters into the heart of this rapidly intensifying tempest. The prudent captains adopted a course along Lake Superior's northern Canadian shore, which would offer them some protection from the storm, and kept in regular contact with each other via radio. The Edmund Fitzgerald and the Arthur M. Anderson pushed on through the night, weathering what Captain McSorley described as the worst sea he had ever seen. The freighters were whipped by 60-mile-per-hour winds and battered by 10-foot-tall waves, which gradually wore down the Edmund Fitzgerald. By 3:30 in the morning, the freighter had begun to lean to one side, and by 5:30, the ship had lost both its radars to the wind and was taking heavy waves over her decks.
At 7:10 that evening, when the Edmund Fitzgerald was about 15 nautical miles from Whitefish Bay and the twin cities of Sault Ste. Marie beyond, Captain Cooper's first mate, Morgan Clark, radioed Captain McSorley to inform him of the presence of a ship which lay ahead of them. He concluded the transmission by asking the Edmund Fitzgerald how it was faring. "We're holding our own," was McSorley's reply. That was the last anyone heard from Ernest McSorley or his crew. Mere moments later, the Edmund Fitzgerald suddenly and mysteriously plummeted 530 feet down to the bottom of Lake Superior, twisting in half in the process and entubing Captain McSorley and his crew of 28 in the frigid, watery grave. There were no witnesses of the disaster, and the crew members of the Arthur M. Anderson only realized that something was amiss when McSorley failed to respond to their radio queries, and when they found that they were unable to see any of the Fitzgerald's lights in the distance when the fog cleared. When an enormous freighter failed to appear on his radar screen, Captain Cooper called the Canadian Coast Guard and informed them of the situation. An hour later, the American and Canadian Coast Guards launched a joint aerial search for the missing vessel and its crew. The rescue team's efforts were soon supplemented by those of the crews of the Arthur M. Anderson and other nearby freighter, William Clay Ford. Despite a thorough and concentrated search, only a trace of the freighter that was the rescue team managed to find in that day were the remains of a lifeboat shattered beyond repair. The following day, as news of the missing freighter began to circulate through the Great Lakes region, Father Richard Ingalls of the Mariner Church of Detroit rang his church's bell at 29 times, each toll representing a lost crew member of the Edmund Fitzgerald. For 31 years, the Reverend of the Mariners Church would continue to perform this ritual on the anniversary of the freighter's disappearance. 3 days later, a U.S. Navy aircraft equipped with a metal detection device discovered the wreck of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald lying in two pieces at the bottom of Lake Superior, about 15 nautical miles from the mouth of the Whitefish Bay. Subsequent diving operations, one of them conducted by the mariner explorer Jean-Claude Cousteau, who was son of Jacques Cousteau, failed to recover any of the bodies of the 29 sailors who went down with the ship. Throughout the next 2 decades, many different theories were put forth as to the cause of the freighter's demise. Some believe that the Fitzgerald sustained a fatal damage while bottoming out on the 6-fathom shoal northwest of Caribou Island, not far from its final destination. Others maintained that the freighter had been buried by twin rogue waves measuring about 35 feet in height, which the crew of the Arthur M. Anderson had encountered at 6:40 a.m. on the morning of November 10th. Others still suggest that the ship's cargo hold was flooded because the crew failed to properly close the hatches and seal it from the elements. Up-to-date authorities disagree on the specific factors, and it has contributed to the sinking of the Fitzgerald, and to this day, the true cause of the sinking remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the Great Lakes.
Yeah, so there's all kinds of certainly plenty of theories and plenty of evidence because of they found the wreck and they know where it is on the bottom. It's really it's still so kind of baffling and amazing to think about that massive ship down on the bottom of the lake.
Yeah.
Now it sounds deep, 530 feet of water, but you got to remember the ship was over 700 feet.
It was a big ship.
It was a big ship. In theory, if it took a nosedive, it could hit the bottom and still have a whole bunch of the ship sticking up out of the water.
But it snapped in two, so down it both came. Now, in 1995, there was a dive that actually recovered the bell of the ship, which was considered the heart of a ship at that point in time. They kept the bell, the original bell, above water, and they replaced it with another bell that was identical to it, except for all 29 names of the crew were actually inscribed on it, and that was brought back down to be sort of a grave marker for all the bodies down there.
Yeah. So, final resting place for them down there, and in not unusual Great Lakes fashion,
Burial at sea.
Burial at sea, but it's also the fact that the even though they were looking, they never found any of them.
Yeah.
As
we said, the Great Lakes do not yield up their dead.
Has a definite tendency to just swallow a person whole and not to be seen again.
Yeah.
So, not unusual.
So we have talked about the Flying Dutchman in the past. There are a lot of ships that have this title, the original one being the one that sailed around the Cape of Great Horn. But we've also talked about one up in Maine, and we've talked about the one, the Carroll M. Deering, which is also known as a Flying Dutchman down in the Outer Banks. So this is the Flying Dutchman of the Great Lakes.
Yes. And this is the SS Bannockburn. And it has... no compilation of nautical mysteries of North America's Great Lakes would be complete without a nod to the SS Bannockburn, a steamship which disappeared somewhere in Lake Superior on a snowy November day in 1902. To this day, the wreck of the SS Bannockburn remains undiscovered despite, some say, the efforts of her ghostly crew, who are said to appear to sailors from time to time on the decks of their phantom vessel, perhaps in the vicinity of their final resting place before vanishing into thin air. The SS Bannockburn was constructed back in 1893 in Middlesbrough, Great Britain by the British shipping magnate Sir Rayton Dixon. We'll go with that. Sir Dixon. The 245-foot steamer was built for the Montreal Transportation Company and was designed to fit through the Welland Canal and was equipped with a steel hull for added protection. Something which she would put to use. Mm-hmm. She was launched that same year and sent across the Atlantic and up the St. Lawrence River to her new home. Throughout the course of her life, the SS Bannockburn was plagued by misfortune. In April of 1897, she ran into a cluster of sea rocks near the Snake Island Lighthouse on Lake Ontario, southwest of Kingston. She began to take on water, forcing her crew to dump much of her cargo into the lake in order to keep her afloat. The ship was subsequently patched up and put back into service, only to suffer another mishap several months later. In October 1897, while hauling a load of grain from Chicago to Kingston, the SS Bannockburn hit the wall of the Welland Canal and foundered in that shallow waterway.
She's not having luck with grain.
No, not much luck at all. And then, the SS Bannockburn began what would be her final earthly voyage on November 20th, 1902. Leaving Fort William with 85,000 bushels of wheat in her hold. While leaving port, she grounded in shallow water. Although the accident did not appear to damage the ship in any way, it was decided that the voyage would be postponed until the following day. On November 21st, the SS Bannockburn set out once again for Georgian Bay, at the eastern end of Lake Huron, skirting the northern shores of Lake Superior. Her 21-man crew sailed her without incident to a point about 40 miles northeast of Isle Royale, where she was spotted by the captain of another Great Lakes freighter named James McMaw. Through using his binoculars, the captain checked on the ship periodically as he passed her. After attending to some business on his own vessel, McMaw raised his binoculars once again and discovered to his surprise that the Bannockburn was nowhere to be seen. Before he could relocate the ship, a heavy fog rolled in and obscured his vision. The captain supposed that the mist must have shrouded the Bannockburn and continued on his way.
That night, the Witch of November reared her ugly head and swept across Lake Superior, whipping up waves and buffeting boats. About 11 p.m., through the haze of wind-blown snow, the crew of the passenger steamer called the SS Huronic spied a pattern of lights which recognized as the Bannockburns. The freighter did not appear to be in distress, and the two vessels passed without incident. The crew of the USS Huronic was perhaps the last men to set eyes on the Bannockburn, at least in physical form. When the freighter missed her appointment at the Sioux Locks, few were overly concerned, assuming that the crew had taken shelter somewhere to wait out the storm. When Bannockburn failed to show up the following day, it became clear that some mishap had befallen her. When a week and a half had elapsed, the ship was presumed lost with all hands. The Kingston-based newspaper of the British Whig put it in their December 2nd, 1902 issue. It is generally concluded that the missing steamer is not within earthly hailing distance and that she has been found an everlasting berth in an unexplored depths of Lake Superior, and the facts of her foundering will never be known. It is asserted by the mariners that the Bannockburn spoilers must have exploded, causing her to sink immediately without giving those aboard a moment in which to seek escape. If this theory is correct, then the big steamer quickly sank beneath the waves of the Great Lake, carrying down her crew to a quick and sure death. It is sad to know that many lives were lost, but the sorrow strikes home deeper within when it is known that the greater part of the crew were well known within this city. Only a trace of the steamer was ever to surface, and that was a blood-stained life preserver made from cork, which washed up on the shores of the Grand Marinus, Michigan, at the western end of Lake Superior on December 15th of 1902. Throughout the winter, divers searched in vain for the wreck of the Bannockburn, and to date, the ship's whereabouts still remain unknown.
One of the ones that the lakes have swallowed up whole, not to be seen since over 100 years. Thousands of them down there. So, legend has it that every so often sailors will spot the ghost of Bannockburn plowing her way through the waves of Lake Superior, her lamps flickering and her pilot house dark before vanishing into the spray. This legend has become so well known throughout Wisconsin, Minnesota, and northern Ontario that the ghost of the Bannockburn has acquired the nickname the Flying Dutchman of the Great Lakes. The Dutchman being a legendary ghost ship doomed to perpetually sail the turbulent waters off South Africa's Cape of Good Hope. Some say that the crew of the Bannockburn willingly endures a similar fate, routinely returning from the great beyond to sail the frigid waters of Lake Superior in the hope that their final resting place will one day be discovered and accorded the respect it deserves. Flying Dutchman.
Yep.
Bannockburn.
Yep.
Many. We'll have how many? I wonder how many more Flying Dutchman stories there are around the globe.
I don't know.
Gosh, we could probably do a whole episode on them. Although we've already talked about several of them.
Yeah, we've already talked about 4 now.
Wow.
All right, the
Anyways,
Emperor.
The Emperor. So yes, the Emperor. Another ship. Not the Emperor, but the ship known as the Emperor.
Built in 1911 in Collingwood, Ontario, it provided exemplary service for over 35 years before its loss in 1947. Sailing near the Isle Royale in Lake Superior, the ship's first mate followed an incorrect course and struck the canoe rocks off the island. The Emperor sank in less than 30 minutes, with 12 crew members going down with the ship, and the other 21 being rescued by a nearby Coast Guard cutter. The wreck is very popular dive site, and some divers report seeing crew members still going about his duty aboard the ship. So nice short one.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things happening around the Isle Royale. I think that's our third story that's near that location.
Yeah, I mean, there's...
It's a dangerous area.
Exactly. There's certain points through the Great Lakes that are particularly perilous for shipping. So that's certainly one of them. And well, another one is actually right out here, St. Lawrence Seaway.
Yeah.
Very, very narrow stretch of deep water channel for these massive ships to navigate. So
we're on a pretty open area, but there is one that gets closer to the Thousand Island Bridge and Rock Island Lighthouse that is known as the Narrows heading into Alexandria Bay, and you do not want to be swimming anywhere near that. You will get swept through.
Yeah.
It is a very dangerous area. Right off of Rock Island Lighthouse, they have 2 wrecks right there.
Very swift waters through there. And then, heck, there was another Canada Steamship Lines. That one, gosh, I'd have to look up the details, but that one sank even more recently in the channel right by Alex Bay.
Yeah.
Fortunately, everybody was saved from that one, which is probably, and everybody knows exactly where it is and what happened to it. It hit a shoal and all that, which is probably why it doesn't quite have the same reverence as the Edmund Fitzgerald.
Yeah, there's no mystery about it. Now, Alex Bay actually has a Coast Guard station right there.
Yeah,
because it is so busy through those narrows and it's so dangerous.
And that massive ship sank
within
within just a few hundred yards of the Coast Guard station. So
yeah. So our last story for tonight has to deal with the Hamilton and the Scourge.
Yes. So over 100 and just making sure I'm not missing any messages.
I've been trying to watch.
Okay. So, over 130 years after Le Griffon's disappearance and half a century after France ceded Canada to Great Britain, and about 3 decades after Britain ceded her 13 colonies to the United States, the Great Lakes resounded with the thunder of cannons and the rattle of musketry in a conflict known today as the War of 1812. Angered by the British Royal Navy's practice of impressing American citizens into service, and insulted by King George III's attempts to prevent American merchants from trading with Napoleonic France, with whom Britain was at war, the United States Congress declared war on Great Britain, initiating the War of 1812. Throughout the summer and autumn of that year, the Great Lakes bore witness to a number of deadly clashes between American and British-Canadian forces, including the successful British siege of Detroit and a failed American invasion of Upper Canada, which was the Canadian side of the Great Lakes. On April 27, 1813, the U.S. Army and Navy launched an attack on the British city of York, which is now known as present-day Toronto, situated on the western shores of Lake Ontario. The American soldiers successfully captured the city, only to be killed and maimed by the detonation of the fort's powder magazine, which the tremendous explosion having been orchestrated by the retreating British. The Americans avenged this act by plundering the town and setting many of its buildings on fire.
British like burning things.
Except, well, we burned.
And we burn them too.
We burned York. We burned Toronto. Of course, they burned Washington, D.C., but hey, details.
And Richmond during the Revolutionary War, but we'll get back to that later.
Details.
Going on.
Whole nother episode. So, the U.S. troops went on to attack and capture the southeasterly Fort George, situated at the mouth of the Niagara River. Later that summer, they attempted to besiege a British garrison at the present-day Burlington, Ontario, southwest of York, and the British Royal Navy sailed out to stop them, and thus, on the morning of August 7, 1813, the British and American Great Lakes fleets found themselves face to face, just beyond cannon range of one another, unable to engage due to an uncharacteristic absence of wind which settled over Lake Ontario. One of the vessels in the U.S. fleet during this spell was a Canadian merchant schooner turned American warship called the USS Scourge, and one of the sailors aboard that vessel was a Canadian expat named Ned Myers. Many years later, Myers would tell his story to celebrated American novelist James Fenimore Cooper, who put his tale into print in his 1843 biography of him entitled Life Before the Mast. Myers, via Cooper's book, wrote, "It was a lovely evening, not a cloud visible, and the lake being as smooth as a looking-glass. The English fleet was but a short distance to the northward of us, so near indeed that we could almost count their ports. They were becalmed like ourselves, and a little shattered." Now, a little shattered meaning just a little disorderly. They were not were not able to go ahead and form up into battle lines. Now, after having their supper, Myers and the crew of the USS Scourge bedded down next to the cannons, and Myers wrote, "I was soon asleep, as if lying in the bed of a king. How long my nap lasted or what took place in the interval, I cannot say. I awoke, however, in the consequence of large drops of rain falling on my face. When I opened my eyes, it was so dark I could not see the length of the deck. As Myers snuck away from his post to retrieve a bottle of grog, the schooner on which he served was suddenly beset by a violent storm. The Scourge quickly took on water and in less than a minute began to sink. That's pretty quick to go down in a storm. But anyways, the flashes of lightning were incessant and nearly blinded me. Our decks seemed on fire, and yet I could see nothing. I heard no hail, no order, no call. But the schooner was filled with the shrieks and cries of the men to leeward who were lying jammed under their guns, shot boxes, shot, and other heavy things that had gone down as the vessel fell over. I now crawled aft on the upper side of the bulwarks amid a most awful and infernal din of thunder and shrieks and dazzling flashes of lightning, the wind blowing all the while like a tornado. And now came across me that if the schooner should right, she was filled and must go down, and that she might carry me with her in the suction. I made a spring, therefore, and fell into the water several feet from the place where I had stood. It is my opinion the schooner sank as I left her. Myers began to swim for the first time in his life. By chance, he bumped into a lifeboat into which he managed to climb. Though in oppressive darkness punctuated by blinding flashes of lightning, he searched for survivors and managed to drag 7 fellow soldiers into the tiny craft. Myers and his shipmates were later rescued by American sailors whose ship had survived the tempest. In addition to the Scourge, the storm claimed another U.S. Navy schooner called the USS Hamilton. Of the 102 sailors aboard these vessels at the time of the squall, only 16 survived their capsizing, many of them having been trapped inside the ships during their 300-foot descent to the bottom of the lake.
Now, legend has it on foggy nights in the waters outside Burlington, Ontario, sailors sometimes spy 2 old-fashioned squared-sailed vessels with their gun ports open and their decks illuminated by the eerie glow of the lanterns hanging in the rigging. As soon as they are spotted, these phantasmal vessels shake off as if buffeted by unearthly winds before sinking beneath the surface, all while accompanied by the faint shrieks of drowning sailors whose skeletons lie below, entombed within the wrecks of the Scourge and the Hamilton. Now, if you think about it, if they had fallen asleep with their gun ports open, ready for battle, that's why it sank so quickly. You had all those holes in the side of the wall.
Yep, and they were all ready and open for battle.
Yep.
So, that was it. Wow. Okay, yeah. That was the last story for tonight.
Yep.
Now, with that said,
there's still a lot more out
gosh,
there.
there's so much out there.
This was just a tip of the iceberg.
We could do a whole season on Great Lakes ghosts between the ships,
and the lighthouses,
and the islands, and everything that is out there. There are so many ghost stories along the shores that it's, amazing. And I found an interesting fun one in there.
The Raspberry Lighthouse, was it? Raspberry Island Lighthouse?
Raspberry Island Lighthouse. There's also the one I think was the very last one in the book that talks about in Superior, the city of Superior, not the lake, but the city of Superior that's on Lake Superior. Anyways, they have a huge iron ore. Bless you.
Excuse me.
Huge iron ore loading docks there, and they were a very perilous place to work. And
so it's not just the water; it's by the water. It's everything involved in shipping from the loading docks to the lighthouses.
Yep.
And beyond.
Yeah. And now, fortunately, my mother is actually watching tonight, so hi, Mom. And she reminded me that the shipwreck that I was talking about up in Alex Bay, even though no hands went down with that ship, the ship's name is the Roy Godfrey. And that ship has claimed multiple divers. It's a very perilous section of the river, very heavy currents, very dangerous wreck to dive, and divers have been lost diving on that wreck. Some even fairly recently.
Yeah.
So just because a ship has found its way to the bottom doesn't necessarily mean it's done claiming people. If you're not an experienced enough diver, or if something goes awry while you're down several hundred feet.
Yeah, this is not the place to come diving if you're a brand new diver.
No, not at all.
Not at all.
Nope.
So.
You might hear Una playing over there in the background. She's
With
got
her new toy.
Her new toy. She's batting around ping pong balls and tracks and having a good old time.
It's her new bat toy.
Yep. So,
with that is our final story for the night. 2 weeks, we're going to talk about some haunted universities and colleges around the U.S. So, since school's back in session, we figured we should do a school episode.
Back in session. Kind of, sort of, somewhat.
It's the best I can do with back to school. Being what it is this year.
Yeah. It is what it is.
Yeah.
So we will chat up our universities and
yeah, because both of our universities are haunted, so they'll be in there, and we'll pick up some more. We'll just bounce around the U.S. with some universities.
So with that,
yep. We hope you guys had a good night and a good storytelling session, and we will catch you in 2 weeks.
Yep, and of course, as always, if you want to drop us a line with anything, have any questions or anything like that, drop us a line anytime. We're around. You can drop us a note on Facebook, send us an email, all that good stuff. Yep. We're happy to hear from you.
And you'll be able to catch us actually in September. We're going to be at Fleetwood Paracon, which is on September 26th, knock on wood.
Knock on wood. Please
continue. They just did a couple of really cool announcements of people who are going to be coming by. Ghost Finders, the entire team of Ghost Finders is going to be there, which is really awesome. We've actually met Daniel Klaus. And he runs Haunted Hinsford House up in New York.
Oh.
Yeah, I think it's Hinsford House. Anyway, and we're actually also going to be with the Twisted Realm crew in November. We're going to be on one of their investigations on the USS Wisconsin.
Down in Norfolk.
So that'll be fun to go to.
We got plans coming up.
Yeah, a couple of other things coming up.
And of course, a busy October right around the corner.
Oh yes, and of course our friends at Transcend Paranormal have got their investigations going. They've got one at. Do they have a haunted Henricus coming up?
I think they do.
They do. I think it's in October, which is why we're not going to be there.
Unfortunately.
But it's the first weekend in October. A lot of other
things are starting to kind of get back to some semblance of somewhat normal.
Yeah, so definitely check out.
They're operating with their safety
restrictions,
and safety procedures like we are. So it's a good opportunity to get out, have some fun, and all well, of course, recognizing
safety first.
Yeah. So, check out our friends at Twisted Paranormal, Haunted Nights,
and Transcend
Paranormal,
up at Henricus,
Fleetwood Paracon, all kinds of good stuff going on. Yep. So, and
we'll hopefully see you out and about, either on a tour or at one of these upcoming events. Until then, stay spooky, and we will too, and we'll bring you another fun storytelling session in 2 weeks.
Yep, and we got a couple of suggestions here for things to look up. So, Mom mentioned Gettysburg colleges.
Yes.
We'll have to look up some of those, and
we need to just do an entire Gettysburg thing.
Yes, we do actually. Yeah, but we could do the colleges separately.
Yeah.
There's plenty of Gettysburg stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so much stuff. Yeah. So much research to do. Keeps us busy. Keeps us happy.
I am dreaming way too much about ghosts these days.
What's wrong with that?
I don't want to talk about my dreams.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Anyway.
Moving on. We'll see you all soon, and thanks again for tuning in, and we will see you all at least in a couple of weeks.
Yep.
So, all right.
Cheers.
Bye, everybody.